Hey guys, it's Tim back with Brewster Consulting Group. Today we're going to talk all about project artifacts. In our last video, we hit on the 5 process groups of an organized project, and within each of those process groups, there are artifacts, or otherwise known as documents, that are going to help keep the project manager and the project team on track throughout the project. We're not going to cover all of the artifacts, but we are going to hit on a few of the really important ones that are going to help you lead projects more effectively whenever you go to do that for your organization. As always, though, if you need assistance or templates for any of these, you guys can feel free to reach out to us and we'll do everything that we can to help. Okay, let's dive right in. So in our last video, just as a quick reminder, we talked about the 5 process groups of any organized project: initiation, planning, execution, monitoring and controlling, and closing are the 5 process groups. If you follow an appropriate project management methodology, within each of those process groups, there are going to be documents or artifacts that you can use that'll just help your project stay on time, on budget, and within the established scope. So let's talk about a few of those artifacts. It's important to note that these are not the only artifacts within each of the process groups that you all should be compiling and using as a project manager, but these are some of the most important ones, and I'll give a little bit of details behind each one. So let's start with initiation. One of the important documents or artifacts is the business case. Think about the business case of a project as the why behind a project. Usually, you're not going to pursue a project that requires money and time from resources within a business without a particular why. That could be, hey, we think there's a cost savings opportunity over here, or hey, there's actually a revenue enhancement if we were to change some of our practices or processes over here. So the business case is the why. The project charter really authorizes your project manager to wrangle the resources, like the humans, that are necessary to complete the work. So this is typically signed off on from an executive sponsor that essentially says, yes, we realize these people at our organization work 40 hours a week. They can allocate 10 hours of their week towards this particular project because we believe there's going to be an ROI that comes from it. And again, that is signed off usually by an executive sponsor, that project charter. Last, with an initiation, there's a stakeholder register, and this can be viewed as just a large list of who's involved in your project. It'll help you as you get through like project planning and execution, monitoring and controlling, to know who is responsible for what portion of the project. So in a stakeholder register, it typically contains information like their name, email address, phone number, so contact information. Their role on the project is really important. It might not be the same as their job title at your organization. You may have a director of finance, let's say, who is the finance SME for this particular project, and that's the person that you would go to as the subject matter expert to get information particularly about finance. Let's move on to project planning. So some of the important documents within project planning are the scope statement. So if you think about it with me, in the initiation phase, you got through your business case, right? You have your why. Your scope statement specifically delineates what you are going to achieve. Like, this is my scope for this project. Another important component of the scope statement is what is out of scope for this particular project. If you get down, 2 or 3 months in a project and there is an opportunity for scope creep, is what we call it. So that's additional scope coming into your project. That could delay your project. It could result in increased costs to your project, even though it might be of particular benefit to your organization. You'll have to go through kind of a change control process if that's something that you want to pursue, which we'll talk about here in just a couple of minutes in the monitoring and controlling process group. So your scope statement, again, to revisit that is essentially what you are setting out to achieve with your particular project, and specifically what you're not setting out to achieve. Your milestone list, think of a milestone as a gate throughout your project. You have various milestones that you want to meet to be able to keep you on track throughout the project, specifically as it relates to your schedule. This will really help whenever it comes to your project schedule, which is the next artifact on the list. Your project schedule contains specific tasks and your milestones, but those tasks that support the milestones. So it's one level deeper from a milestone. You develop specific tasks, the dates that you want to complete those tasks by. And then once you have your full project schedule kind of blown out, you'll be able to see, hey, here's how long this is going to take for this entire implementation. Another important artifact within planning is your budget. You do want to make sure that you have a budget for your project and that it is closely followed. This typically contains the authorization, again, from your executive sponsor to spend money on the project. Next on the list is your voice of the customer. So this is a lean document that is used oftentimes in process improvement projects. And this basically takes information from who you are implementing the project for, and it gives them an opportunity to express what their desires are or their outcomes are from implementing this particular project. So it's actually a really powerful exercise that as you're planning your project, you can take your expectations from the customer who you're implementing the project for and actually bake that into your project plan to make sure you get buy-in from those folks as you're going down the implementation road. Your communication requirements analysis. So you do want to have a communication plan developed, and especially if you're in a larger organization where change management is going to become a play within a project. Your communications requirements analysis is the analysis that you run through to ensure that you're communicating on a regular basis with people who are interested in the project, either by phone, email, meetings, roundtables, general updates, things like that. Your risk register. So super important component of project planning is to outline any risks that you can foresee with a project. If you get down a project and you realize a risk has materialized, well, that turns into an issue, which we'll talk about here in just a second in project execution. But preliminarily, you do want to outline the risks that you have identified during the planning phase, just to make sure that as you develop your plans, you're doing everything you can to curb that risk from actually happening. This next one is, if applicable, it's called your procurement selection criteria. If you're going out and working with a vendor for a particular project that you need to procure anything from, then you would go through this selection criteria. So think about if you are, again, we'll use the example that we used before, implementing an AP system within the finance division. Well, there are various AP providers out there, right? So you want to go out and you want to make sure that the one that you're picking for your specific organization is most aligned with a particular set of criteria. And then all of this together really compiles your project management plan. So this project management plan is used as kind of the benchmark from moving from project planning into project execution. In project execution, you're essentially executing on your project management plan that you put together. So if the plan is done well, then that's where you can experience the benefits during the project execution phase of a well-planned project. So some of the important artifacts within project execution are your action item log, your issues log, your project meeting agenda, and a status update. So an action item log, this is where you document all of the commitments that your team has made and by when. If you can think about it with me again, if you've got 20 members of a project team and you're talking about what each one of them is doing and each one of them is making commitments on, sure, yeah, I'm going to get X, Y, and Z done by XYZ date. You want to make sure that that's documented somewhere, right? So your action item log typically has the what, so it's the specific task that's supposed to be completed. It has the person who's responsible for it, and it has the by when. At the very bare minimum, that's what an action item log would have. And the purpose of this is for the project manager to go back and be able to say, okay, did Susie Q do what she said she was going to do by March 5th? And if that hasn't taken place, well, then that prompts the project manager to make sure that they get what they need from that person, or at least fosters a conversation. Your issue log. So I talked a little bit about, whenever we were thinking about project planning, your risk register. Your issue log is where you actually log issues if they materialize from risks. So the issues log contains information like what the issue actually is, when it occurred, the severity of the issue, if it's kind of a mild issue, if it's kind of medium, middle of the road, or if it's absolutely critical to another milestone or an additional task that you're needing to work on. You need to make sure that you track the criticality of it so that you can prioritize what you focus your time on. Your meeting agenda is just an organized way so that whenever you get 15, 20 people in a room, if you think about it, that can be an expensive meeting. So you want to have some structure around what you all are talking about. And a project meeting agenda just gives you some framework to be able to do that. So it usually contains things like the meeting title. It contains things like the time, the date that the meeting took place. You'll have notes or meeting minutes that are captured or that you'll want to capture. You'll have who is there, and it also does contain action items as well, and then deliverables too for the project. Your project status update. At Brewster Consulting Group, we typically send out project status updates at least every week, if not more frequently, for quicker projects. But this just gives executives who are interested in the project status a high-level overview of, all right, how's this project going? It contains things like upcoming focus, so if there's upcoming tasks that they might be interested in. It contains overall status update. Are we on track? Are we behind? Are we at risk of this project actually not being completed within the budget or within the schedule that we established? Just gives super high level information typically to those interested parties. Okay, let's move on to project monitoring and controlling and the important artifacts within this process group. First is your change control process. If you think about it with me, if you need to introduce new scope, if you need to extend the schedule, or if you need to increase the budget for your project, you need to have a controlled way to actually do that so it doesn't look like you did not meet the important criteria for your project that you were initially chartered to do. So that's what the change control process does. It establishes guidelines for how new scope, additional dollars, or additional schedule is incorporated into your project. Your change log just details out the changes that have taken place and contains information like the actual change itself, when that change was introduced, when it was approved, and who authorized it. All right, moving on to project closing. So the important artifacts within project closing that I've outlined here are your lessons learned log and your project closing report. So first, your lessons learned log incorporates all of the lessons that you've learned throughout the project. This can seem like a pretty daunting task. So it's really important to acknowledge that, hey, we need to have a mechanism so that whenever we learn something through this project, we have a way to document that in all of the process groups as you're working your way through your project. So that contains information like who learned the lesson, what the lesson was that was learned, and when specifically, so that whenever you go to implement new projects, you can refer back to those lessons learned so you don't make the same mistakes, or that so you learn from the particular benefits that you were able to garner from the lesson that you learned. Your project closing report, that is a report that essentially releases the resources from the project. So we talked about at the very beginning your project charter containing the authorization for your project manager to wrangle the resources, where your closing report is essentially the authorization from your executive sponsor to release those resources back to the other activities that they have at your particular business. All right, I hope this was super helpful to each of you as it relates to the artifacts within each of the process groups and gives you a little bit more of a feeling for how you can project manage the projects that your organization has ahead of it in an organized fashion and use these artifacts ultimately to your advantage. As always, if you all have any questions about any of the artifacts that I've covered or need templates or tools or might even want help from standing up a project management office at your organization, I'd love to hear from you. Do not hesitate to contact us and we'll do everything we can to help. But again, hopefully this video was super helpful to each of you, and thanks again for watching.